The metal shovel struck the dry, compacted earth with a heavy thud that echoed down the silent suburban street. It was a crisp Saturday morning, the kind where the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, and the only sounds were the distant hum of lawnmowers. But I wasn't mowing. I was on my hands and knees, covered in sweat and dark soil, ripping up the pristine emerald sod that I had spent the last 3 years watering and fertilizing. I grabbed a chunk of the grass, roots and all, and tossed it onto a blue tarp. It landed with a dull slap, exposing the raw, brown dirt underneath. It felt destructive, but it also felt like I was finally waking up from a long, expensive dream. Richard, the president of the Homeowners Association, stopped his morning power walk right at the edge of my driveway. He was wearing his signature white polo shirt tucked into beige khaki shorts, his expensive sneakers gleaming in the sunlight. He stared at the patch of dirt I had created with a look of absolute, unadulterated horror. His jaw actually dropped slightly, as if he were witnessing a crime in progress. "Lucas, what on earth are you doing?" Richard barked, stepping onto the edge of my property line, as if he owned it. "You are destroying the curb appeal. We have strict guidelines about landscaping in the bylaws. You can't just tear up the lawn." "I'm not destroying it, Richard," I said, wiping a streak of dirt from my forehead with the back of my glove. "I'm repurposing it. I'm planting a garden. Vegetables, fruit trees, berry bushes. I'm going to grow food." Richard let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded more like a bark. He looked around to see if anyone else was witnessing this insanity. "Food? Lucas, be serious. This is a luxury subdivision, not a peasant farm in the middle of nowhere. You're going to tank the property values for every single one of us. You can't turn a front lawn into a potato patch." I stood up, feeling the ache in my lower back. "It's not just potatoes," I said calmly. "It's a permaculture system. The price of groceries is going up, Richard. Supply chains are getting shaky. It makes sense to be self-sufficient." "You sound like a conspiracy theorist," he scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "We live in the modern world. The grocery store is 5 minutes away. This is ridiculous. I'm telling you now, the board will not approve this. You'll be hearing from us." He stormed off, pulling out his phone, presumably to call the other board members. I watched him go, then turned back to the dirt. I knew this was going to be a fight. I knew they would hate it. But something deep inside me told me that the green, chemical-soaked carpet of grass was a lie. It was useless. It consumed water and money and gave nothing back. I wanted land that worked for me. I picked up the shovel and drove it back into the ground. By the end of the week, the transformation was shocking. I had removed every single inch of grass from my front yard. In its place, I had built raised wooden beds out of cedar planks and dug deep swales to catch rainwater. To the untrained eye, it looked like a construction site. To my neighbors, it looked like a disaster zone. I could see them peeking through their blinds, whispering to each other as I hauled wheelbarrows of compost from the backyard to the front. The fines started arriving in the mail almost immediately. Richard was true to his word. Every single day, a new crisp white envelope stamped with the HOA logo appeared in my mailbox. They cited me for unsightly landscaping, unauthorized terrain modification, and creating a public nuisance. I didn't open them. I stacked the letters on my kitchen counter in a neat pile. I knew what they said. They wanted me to fall back in line. They wanted the green carpet back. Chloe, my girlfriend of 2 years, came over that Friday night. She didn't even say hello when she walked in the door. She just stood in the entryway, pointing out the window at the mounds of mulch and soil. "Lucas, everyone is talking about you," she said, her voice trembling with embarrassment. I ran into Richard's wife at the store. She asked if you were having a mental breakdown. She asked if we needed financial help. "I'm not having a breakdown, Chloe," I said, trying to keep my voice calm as I washed the dark soil off my hands in the kitchen sink. The water ran brown before turning clear. "I'm preparing. Look at the news. Prices are skyrocketing. The weather is getting unpredictable. It makes sense to grow our own food. We have the land. Why waste it on grass?" Chloe shook her head, pacing around the kitchen island, her heels clicking on the tile. "You sound paranoid. You sound like one of those crazy people who builds a bunker in the woods. We live in a civilized society. Lucas, we have delivery apps. You are embarrassing me over some carrots. It's not just carrots, I argued, turning to face her. It's independence. Just get a few months. When everything blooms, it will be beautiful, and it will save us money. We can cook meals with food we grew ourselves. I don't care about the money, she snapped, grabbing her purse from the counter. I care about how we look. I care about my reputation. I can't come over here with your yard looking like a garbage dump. Richard said he might sue you if you don't fix it. She opened the door. Call me when you're done playing farmer. I'm going to stay at my sister's place. I can't deal with the drama. I watched her drive away, her car disappearing down the perfectly paved street lined with identical oak trees. The house felt very quiet, empty in a way it hadn't before. But I didn't chase her. I didn't call her back. I had seeds to plant. The weeks turned into months, and the ridicule didn't stop. In fact, it got worse as the garden went through its ugly phase. Before the plants filled in, the yard was just a collection of sticks, dirt mounds, and straw. It did look messy, I had to admit. Richard made a point of stopping by whenever I was outside, usually with a smug, triumphant grin on his face. How's the harvest, Farmer Lucas? He would shout from the sidewalk, making sure the other neighbors could hear. Growing any weeds today? My landscaper is coming tomorrow, if you wanted to pave over this mess for you. I'm sure we can get you a discount to fix this disaster. I learned to tune him out. I focus on the soil. I could smell the life returning to the earth. While their lawns were soaked in chemicals to keep them artificially green, my yard smelled like rain and rich humus. I spent my evenings researching canning and preservation methods. I bought a pressure canner and stacks of glass jars, storing them in the basement. I was building something real. Summer arrived with a brutal heat wave that turned the neighborhood lawns yellow. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the asphalt. Richard and the other neighbors ran their sprinklers for hours every day, fighting a losing battle against the scorching sun. Their water bills must have been astronomical, but my garden thrived. The thick layer of mulch I had put down kept the moisture locked in the soil, and the plants I had chosen were deep-rooted and drought-resistant. Suddenly, the mess of dirt exploded into a lush jungle of green. The trellis archway over my front path was covered in flowering beans and climbing spinach. The raised beds were overflowing with red peppers, heavy tomatoes, and yellow squash. Sunflowers stood 10 feet tall along the fence line, creating a natural privacy screen of gold and green. It was wild, chaotic, and incredibly alive, but the neighbors didn't see the beauty. They only saw a violation of order. I wasn't invited to the annual block party that year. I could hear the music and laughter from Richard's backyard, 2 houses down. I sat on my front porch, shelling fresh peas into a metal bowl, listening to the clinking of wine glasses. He's probably eating dirt over there, I heard a male voice say, followed by a roar of laughter. I recognized the voice as Brad, Richard's best friend. It's an eyesore, Richard's voice agreed loud and clear. But don't worry. The legal team is finalizing the injunction. By fall, that jungle will be gone. I didn't let their words stop me. I knew that legal battles took time, and right now, nature was moving faster than any lawyer could draft a document. The harvest began in earnest in late August. It was overwhelming in the best way possible. I was pulling 10 pounds of tomatoes a day. I had more zucchini than I knew what to do with. I spent my nights in the kitchen, the windows steaming up as I canned sauce, pickles, and jams. My basement shelves, once dusty and empty, began to fill up with rows of colorful jars. Golden peaches, bright red salsa, green beans suspended in brine, pickled peppers. It was a beautiful sight, a mosaic of security. I had enough food stored to last me for months, maybe a year. I even started drying herbs, hanging bundles of oregano, basil, and thyme from the kitchen ceiling. The house smelled amazing, like a gourmet Italian restaurant. I tried to call Chloe once to tell her about the success, to maybe offer her some fresh strawberries, which I knew were her favorite. She sent me straight to voicemail. Later, she texted, "Did you fix the lawn yet? Richard says you're still growing a forest. It's embarrassing, Lucas." I didn't reply. I just put the phone down and went back to chopping cucumbers. I realized that we were living in two different worlds. She lived in a world where appearance was everything. I lived in a world where substance mattered. September brought the first signs of trouble, but not for me. It started with the news reports. A massive hurricane was churning in the Atlantic, moving slowly and creating havoc for shipping lanes up and down the coast. Then, a truckers' strike halted distribution across the region. The news anchors used words like supply chain disruption and temporary shortages, but I saw the panic in their eyes. I went to the grocery store for some basic staples like flour and salt. The mood inside was tense. People were rushing through the aisles, grabbing whatever they could find. The produce section was pathetic. Wilted lettuce, bruised apples, and empty bins where potatoes used to be. The prices had nearly doubled overnight. I saw Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow who lived across the street from me, staring at a carton of eggs that cost $8. She picked it up, looked at the price, and set it back down with a shaking hand. She looked frail and worried, checking her small coin purse. I bought my flour and left. On the way out, I saw Richard in the parking lot, loading cases of expensive bottled water into his SUV. He looked stressed, snapping at his wife to hurry up. When he saw me, he didn't mock me. He just glared, slammed his trunk shut, and drove away. The arrogance was still there, but it was cracking. The storm hit 3 days later. It wasn't the hurricane itself, but the remnants that stalled over our state, dumping rain for 48 hours straight. The flooding washed out the main highway leading into our town, cutting off the trucks. Then a main substation blew, knocking out the power grid for the entire county. The lights flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerators, the air conditioners, the televisions, it all went silent. The neighborhood was plunged into darkness. At first, it felt like an adventure. Neighbors came out onto their porches with flashlights, making jokes about camping out. Power will be back by morning, Richard announced loudly to anyone who would listen, standing in the middle of the street with a high-powered flashlight. I called the mayor. They're working on it. Just a minor glitch. But the power didn't come back in the morning. Or the next. The roads were still impassable due to the flooding. The grocery stores, which had already been low on stock, were picked clean within hours of the storm clearing. We were an island, cut off from the rest of the world. My house was dark like everyone else's, but I wasn't worried. I had a camping stove and plenty of propane. I had my pantry. I had my garden. While the neighborhood was starting to panic, I was making a fresh salad. By day 4, the mood on the street had shifted from annoyance to genuine fear. The perfectly manicured lawns that everyone prided themselves on were now useless. You can't eat grass. You can't eat ornamental hedges. The expensive cars sitting in the driveways were just metal boxes that couldn't go anywhere because the roads were blocked with debris and water. I was out in the front yard harvesting sweet potatoes. The soil was damp and heavy, but the tubers were huge, orange, and heavy in my hands. I brushed the dirt off a particularly large one and placed it in my basket. I felt eyes on me. I looked up and saw Brad standing at the edge of his property. He looked tired. His shirt was wrinkled, and he hadn't shaved in days. He was watching me pull food out of the ground with a look of pure confusion mixed with hunger. "Hey, Lucas," he called out. His voice lacked its usual bite. It sounded thin. Those are potatoes?" "Sweet potatoes." I corrected him, not stopping my work. "They grow well this time of year. High calorie count." Brad licked his lips. "Right. Sweet potatoes. My kids love those." He lingered for a moment, waiting for me to offer him some. When I didn't, he awkwardly kicked a rock and walked back inside his house. That evening, I decided to cook a hearty stew. I fired up the propane camp stove on my back patio. I chopped up onions, carrots, potatoes, and garlic, all fresh from the garden. I opened a jar of the tomato sauce I had canned in August. As the stew began to simmer, the aroma drifted on the wind. It was a rich, savory smell that cut through the stagnant air of the neighborhood. In a normal week, the smell of dinner cooking is background noise. But when hundreds of people haven't had a hot meal in days, it's a beacon. It triggers a primal response. I heard hesitant footsteps on my driveway. I walked around to the front of the house to see Mrs. Gable standing there. She looked even thinner than before, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. She was holding a small silver picture frame in her hands. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice trembling. I smell something wonderful. I'm sorry to bother you." "It's vegetable stew, Mrs. Gable," I said gently. She looked down at the picture frame. "I don't have any cash. The ATMs aren't working. But this is silver. Real sterling silver. I was wondering if I could trade it for a bowl? Just a small one. I haven't eaten a proper meal in 3 days." My heart broke. This woman had lived here for 30 years. She had never been mean to me about the garden. She had just watched quietly. "Put that away, Mrs. Gable," I said, pushing the frame back toward her gently. "You don't need to pay me. Not for food." I led her to the back patio and ladled a generous serving of hot stew into a bowl. I gave her a spoon and a chunk of bread I had baked on the camp stove. She sat down on my patio furniture and ate with tears streaming down her face. She ate quickly, her hands shaking as she lifted the spoon. "Thank you," she whispered between bites. "I've been eating crackers for 2 days. The shelves were empty when I got to the store." "I have plenty," I told her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Take some home for tomorrow, too. I'll pack a jar for you." As she was leaving, clutching a mason jar of soup to her chest like it was a baby, I saw the curtains twitching in the houses nearby. They had seen her enter empty-handed and leave with food. The secret was out. My eyesore was the only functioning grocery store in town. The next morning, the knocking started early. It wasn't the police or the HOA. It was the neighbors. The same people who had signed a petition to have my garden removed were now standing on my porch, looking sheepish and desperate. I opened the door to find a young couple, the Millers, who lived 3 doors down. They had a baby in a stroller. The baby was crying, a thin, high-pitched wail of hunger that cut right through me. "Lucas," the husband said, looking at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. "Look, I know we haven't been friendly. I know I laughed at the mulch piles. But the baby needs soft food. We're out of formula. We're out of everything." I didn't lecture them. I did remind them that they had called the city inspector on me last month to check for rodents. I just looked at the baby. "I have butternut squash," I said. "I can mash it up. It's good for babies. Full of vitamins." I went to the pantry and grabbed 2 squashes and a jar of applesauce I had made. I handed them over. The wife looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. "What do you want for it?" she asked, reaching for her wallet. "I have cash, but I don't know if it's enough." "Just remember this," I said. "Remember this next time you complain about someone trying to be self-sufficient. Remember that you can't eat grass." They nodded vigorously, clutching the squash like it was gold bullion. "We will. We promise." As the day went on, a line formed. I became the neighborhood commissary. I didn't give food to everyone willy-nilly, though. I had a system. I prioritized the elderly and the families with kids. And I made sure they knew exactly where the food came from. It came from the dirt they despised. Then Richard showed up. It was late afternoon on the 5th day of the outage. He walked in my driveway, but he didn't look humble. He looked angry, as if my having food was a personal insult to his authority. He was accompanied by Brad and another man from the HOA board. They walked with a strange, desperate swagger, trying to project power they no longer had. I was watering the kale beds with rainwater I had collected in barrels. I stopped and leaned on my hoe, watching them approach. "Lucas," Richard said, stopping at the edge of the mulch. He didn't ask how I was. He went straight to business. "We need to talk about distribution." "Distribution?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Richard said, puffing out his chest. "As the HOA president, it's my responsibility to ensure the welfare of the community. We're aware you're hoarding supplies. We need to inventory what you have and set up a rationing system for the whole neighborhood. Fair is fair." I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. Hoarding? "Richard, I grew this. I preserved this. While you were watering your grass, I was working. This isn't community property. It's my private garden. It's on land governed by the HOA covenants. Richard snapped, his face flushing red. Technically, you're in violation of the bylaws. We could confiscate this as fines for the months of noncompliance. We are well within our rights to seize this for the greater good. Brad stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. Come on, Luke. Don't be selfish. We're hungry. You have a basement full of food. We've seen people walking away with jars. You can't keep it all to yourself. I'm helping people who ask nicely. I said, my voice hardening. I'm helping Mrs. Gable. I'm helping the Millers. But you three are the ones who tried to sue me into starvation. You wanted this garden gone. If I had listened to you, there would be no food here for anyone. We're in a crisis. Richard shouted, losing his composure. You can't pick and choose. We are the leaders of this community. I absolutely can, I said, stepping closer to them. It's my house. Get off my property, Richard. Richard took a step forward, his fists clenched. You think you can just... I think, I interrupted, staring him down, that you are used to bullying people with letters and lawyers. But right now, your lawyers can't get here, and your money is worthless. The only thing that matters is calories, and I have them. You don't. The silence that followed was heavy. Richard looked at the garden, then at me. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that his title meant nothing. Nature didn't care about his position on the board. The bylaws couldn't grow a tomato. I'll trade you, Brad said suddenly, breaking ranks with Richard. He realized that loyalty to Richard wasn't going to fill his belly. He pulled a gold watch off his wrist. It's a Rolex, worth 10 grand. Just give me a bag of potatoes and some of those pickles. My kids are starving, man. I looked at the watch. It was gleaming in the sunlight. A week ago, it was a status symbol. Now, it was just a shiny piece of metal that couldn't fill a stomach. I don't need a watch, Brad. I said, I can't eat time, but I need help with the compost. If you want food, you work. I have a pile of manure in the back that needs to be turned. It's heavy, smelly work. You do that for 3 hours, you get a basket of food. Brad looked at the watch, then at his soft, manicured hands. He looked at Richard, who was fuming. Then Brad shoved the watch into his pocket. Where's the shovel? Brad asked, stepping away from Richard. Richard gasped, his face turning a deep shade of purple. Brad, you're not actually going to work for him? This is humiliating. We are board members. I'm starving, Richard, Brad muttered, refusing to look at his friend. And his stew smells good. I can't eat pride. He's right, the other board member said quietly. He stepped forward. I'll help too. My back is okay. What do you need done? I need the swales clear of debris, I told the second man. There's a rake by the shed. Brad grabbed his shovel and went to the backyard without another word. The other man went to get the rake. Richard was left standing alone in the driveway. He looked small. He looked defeated. He stood there for a long minute, his pride warring with his hunger. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. Finally, he turned around and walked away. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He couldn't submit to the man he had mocked. I watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of pity and satisfaction. He would rather be hungry and right than humble and fed. That evening, the work was done. Brad and the other neighbor left with baskets full of potatoes, carrots, and jars of sauce. They were dirty, sweaty, and exhausted, but they looked happier than they had in years. They had earned their dinner. Later that night, a familiar car pulled up. It was Chloe. She had managed to navigate the back roads to get here, probably hearing that the floodwaters were receding slightly. She looked frazzled. Her makeup was smeared, and her designer clothes looked rumpled. She walked up the path, stepping carefully over the pumpkin vines, looking at the garden with a mixture of disgust and need. She saw the neighbors gathered on my porch, Mrs. Gable, the Millers, Brad, who was dirty but eating a cucumber. It was a community hub. Lucas, she said, putting on her best smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Oh my God, I was so worried about you. I tried to call, but the cell towers were down. I was busy, I said, standing on the porch steps. I didn't invite her up. I stayed on the top step, looking down at her. I can see that, she said, eyeing the jars of food on the table behind me. My sister's place ran out of food yesterday. We've been terrified. I told her, don't worry, Lucas is prepared. He's smart. I knew you'd have a plan. I told her we could come here. I crossed my arms. Really? Because the last time you were here, you told me I was embarrassing you. You said I was playing farmer. You left because you didn't want to be associated with the eyesore. Chloe's smile faltered. She shifted her weight nervously. I was just stressed, Lucas. You know how I get. But we're a team, right? I'm your girlfriend. You wouldn't let me starve. You left, I said simply. When it got hard, you left. You chose appearance over me. And now that you're hungry, you're back. That's not a teammate, Chloe. That's a parasite. The chatter on the porch stopped. Mrs. Gable stopped eating. Everyone was watching. The silence was louder than the storm had been. Lucas, please, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. I'm hungry. Don't do this in front of them. I sighed. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't Richard. I walked to the table and picked up a jar of green beans and a bag of tomatoes. I walked down the steps and handed them to her. Take this, I said. Eat. Share it with your sister. But don't come back. We're done. Chloe took the food, her face burning with shame. She looked at the bag, then at me. She knew she had no leverage. She knew she had made a bet on the wrong lifestyle. She turned and walked back to her car, clutching the vegetables like they were diamonds. She drove away, and I didn't feel a thing. The crisis lasted another 4 days before the roads were cleared and the power trucks rolled in. When the lights flickered back on, a cheer went up from the neighborhood. But things didn't go back to exactly how they were before. The dynamic on the street had shifted permanently. Richard resigned as HOA president 2 weeks later. He claimed it was for health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. He had lost the respect of the street. He couldn't command people who had seen him powerless and refusing to help. He spent most of his time inside with the blinds drawn. Brad, surprisingly, kept coming by. He asked for advice on planting his own garden. He tore up a section of his backyard, not the front yet. He wasn't that brave to plant potatoes. Just in case, he told me one Saturday. I never want to feel that helpless again. The Millers started a small herb garden on their windowsill. Mrs. Gable started composting. The stigma was gone. As for me, I didn't stop. I expanded. I added beehives the next spring to help with pollination. I planted more fruit trees, apple and pear. But I wasn't the outcast anymore. People stopped while walking their dogs to ask questions. They asked about soil pH and composting. They asked for seeds. The mockery had turned into admiration. They realized that my ugly garden was actually the most beautiful thing on the block because it had a function. It had a soul. It had saved them. One afternoon, I was out weeding the carrots. The sun was warm on my back. Mrs. Gable walked over. She looked healthy again, her cheeks pink. She handed me a plate of warm oatmeal cookies. I used the flour I bought with the money I saved on vegetables, she said with a wink. Thank you, Lucas. You're welcome, Mrs. Gable. I stood up and looked down the street. I saw 3 other houses that had started digging up sections of their lawns. I saw raised beds appearing in driveways. The green, sterile carpet of the neighborhood was breaking up, replaced by patches of life. I wiped the dirt off my hands and took a bite of a cookie. It tasted like victory. They had mocked the dirt. They had laughed at the labor. They had called me crazy for preparing for a rainy day. But when the rain came, they learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't eat prestige. You can't eat an HOA bylaw. I looked at my garden, buzzing with bees and heavy with fruit. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a statement. And as I looked at the new shoots pushing up from the earth, I knew that I would never be hungry again. And neither would the people who were willing to grab a shovel and dig. One Saturday, a man I didn't recognize pulled up in a sleek luxury sedan. He got out and looked at my yard, then at the neighbors' yards. He walked up to where I was teaching a small group about mulching. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm a real estate agent. I have clients specifically asking for this neighborhood. They heard about the Garden District. Property values here have gone up 15% in the last 6 months. I couldn't help it. I laughed. I laughed until my sides hurt. The very thing Richard said would destroy our property values had actually increased them. Richard happened to be walking by, looking older and grayer than before. He heard the agent. He stopped and looked at me. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something sour, but he just shook his head, a wry, defeated smile appearing on his face. "You win, Lucas," he called out softly. "You win." "We all win, Richard," I replied. "That's the point." I walked over to the agent. "Tell your clients that if they move here, they better own a shovel. We don't just buy food here. We grow it." The agent beamed. That's exactly what they want to hear. Security is the new luxury. That night, I sat on my porch as the sun went down. The air was filled with the smell of jasmine and tomato vines. I thought about the future. I knew the world outside remained chaotic, with news of shortages and crises popping up every few months. But on our street, the panic didn't take hold the way it used to. We had a buffer. We had the soil. A young kid from down the block, maybe 12 years old, rode his bike up to my fence. He stopped and stared at the giant pumpkin I was growing for the fall harvest. "Mister," he said, "is that real?" "It's real," I said. "Can you teach me how to grow one?" he asked. "Sure," I said, "but you have to be willing to get dirty. And people might laugh at you at first." The kid shrugged. "Let them laugh. I want a giant pumpkin." I smiled. "Come on in, kid. Let's get a shovel." They mocked my garden until it fed them. But now they didn't mock. They mimicked. And as I watched the kid dig his first hole in the dirt, I knew that the garden was no longer just mine. It belonged to the future. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. It smelled like life. And it was enough.